Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Grad Coach TV, where we demystify and simplify the oftentimes complex and perplexing world of academic research. Today, two of our seasoned dissertation coaches, David Fair and Alexandra Schaefer, will be talking about 6 of the most common mistakes that they see in methodology chapters within dissertations and theses. This discussion is based on one of the many posts over on the Grad Coach blog. So if you are writing up your dissertation, thesis, or research project, you'll want to check out the Grad Coach blog over at www.gradcoach.com/blog. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your research project, whether that's a dissertation, thesis, or any other formal academic research project, you might be interested in our one-on-one private coaching service. You can learn more about that and book a free consultation with one of our friendly coaches over at gradcoach.com.
Welcome to the Coachcast, Alexandra. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here and nice to speak to you again, David. It's always a pleasure.
Cool. So today we're looking at methodology chapter common mistakes.
Yes.
And the first one is having a lack of detail or being too vague. Alexandra, could you unpack this one for us?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's fitting that this is the first one on the list because honestly, this is one of, if not the most frequent comment I leave for students when they're writing their methodology chapter. And I think this goes back to that idea that we've talked about before, where we get so wrapped up as researchers in our own research that we just assume that the reader knows what we're talking about and why we did something. And so sometimes we'll see a student write something like, I did X, and then they move on to the next thing. But they don't actually say specifically what they did or outline each and every design choice, such as the sampling or the data collection procedures, the analysis method. All of those are very important to include and also to describe and give examples for. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point. And I think we forget as well that the methodology chapter isn't just there to say what you did, but it's so that other people could repeat it and also understand what you're doing. So for instance, not including what your sample size was or how you got them means someone can't really interrogate what you did. And so it's super important to cover that. So really important. So that mistake 1 leads really well into mistake number 2. And that's when your method section lacks justification for the choices you've made. What do students need to know about this here?
Absolutely. So jumping off of what you're saying, how 1 and 2 really blend together. Not only in step 1 or mistake 1, do you really need to add these details of precisely what you did. And part of that is, to help other researchers in the future. It will also help you maybe potentially make your study results more generalizable. But, and I think you touched on it, why did you make those design choices? Where did this come from? Did you just pull it out of your head because you thought it sounded good? And that's not acceptable, unfortunately. Even though you may be the smartest graduate student in the world, you have to explain the why of each and every design choice. And what you can do for this, oftentimes what I recommend starting with is reading a lot of the previous research in the existing literature that has done something similar to what you're planning to do and saying, how did they argue for their design choices? What justification did they do? And, this does seem like a lot of extra work, but it will really make your research tighter and more polished. And it will also help you maintain the focus so that you're constantly able to present your ideas and not only present them because your markers will say, okay, why? You will already be ready with that why, doing that justification. And it does take some getting used to doing this, speaking frankly. But after a while, you start to say, okay, I need to tell them what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and where that why came from. And you'll start to pick up it'll become more natural over time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because while papers that you read often don't justify as strongly in a thesis or dissertation, That's what we're being marked on. It's not necessarily what we did, but how we did it and why. And so that's super important to cover. And so it's really important to go back because we stand on the shoulders of giants. So looking at what previous research has done really helps us put things into context. And another option as well, rather than going to previous literature, which is the gold standard, is to potentially look at sort of methodology chapters or books, textbooks. They can be really helpful in getting that really basic information about a methodology. All right, the third major mistake in a methodology is when your research design doesn't align with your research aims, objectives, and questions. So how can students avoid this pitfall?
Okay, so on that note of our research aims, objectives, and questions not being aligned in terms of if we're thinking about do we need to do exploratory or do we need to do confirmatory research, we need to really think about, let's imagine that our research aim is to explore the impact of Zoom breakout rooms on telecollaboration or collaboration in SMEs. So if we're exploring the impact, that kind of research aim, it doesn't actually show that you have a hypothesis yet. You're looking to see if there's an impact. You're exploring, doing exploratory research to see, okay, is there an impact? And maybe going further, what is that impact? So you really have to make sure that those different steps of the question, the aim, the objectives, all align with your overarching umbrella of exploratory. On the other hand, if you already have an idea in mind, you already have a theory that you're basing your study off of, you already have a precedent for what you're doing, and you're trying to confirm if that theory is applicable or accurate with the data that you have, you're probably not going to say, I'm looking at the impact of Zoom telecollaboration or Zoom breakout rooms on telecollaboration in SMEs. That's misaligned because you don't actually know that yet. And so you can't really confirm something that you don't have a precedent for. And so you need to be really aware of how those align with your design choices.
I think that's a great point. And it's really important to get this right because this is a place where you can end up with your methodology section feeling very disjointed and confused. A classic example that really doesn't happen very often, but if you're trying to take a quantitative approach, I'm going to survey people and have them score how they feel about an issue. Those are really two different approaches. You should really be looking at a qualitative approach rather than a quantitative approach to explore that. And so it's really important to work on this. And again, that alignment makes for a really strong and impactful research project. So getting that right is really helpful in not only preventing it being a mistake, but also raising the quality of your methods chapter. So similarly, mistake number 4 is often something we see, and that's an inconsistent or misaligned design choices. So this is taking a step further from the aims and objectives and really looking at how each part of your analysis or methodology fits together. Alexandra, what's the lowdown here?
Yeah, thanks for starting that. Exactly. So we've established our aims, our objectives, our questions. All of that seems aligned. It's all flowing well. But now what are you actually going to do to test those objectives, those maybe hypotheses if you're doing confirmatory? So you have to really think about, this is, I kind of call this the meat and potatoes of the methodology. Because you have the idea and now you have to think about, how am I going to test this idea? And so one of the common mistakes that I see to this end is that it may be that students necessarily don't feel confident and don't really know why they're doing things. So I'll see, for example, clients will take, a methodology that they've read in one study and then part of a research design from another, and they'll justify it with a third disassociated justification. And oftentimes that comes from just not really having a good grasp on methodology. So what I would suggest for that is that each design choice has to align with the next. And so what you really need to think about is, okay, if this is my population, how many people do I need if I'm doing quantitative research, for example, if I'm looking at the impact of, let's say, Zoom telecollaboration rooms on job satisfaction. That is something that you can test quantitatively with a survey. So I have that core idea in mind. So I'm thinking, okay, who is my population? It is people in SMEs. How many of them do I need to have in my sample size so that the results will be more generalizable? So you have to think about, how are you going to do the sampling method? How will you justify your sample? How do you get to that number as well in your sample size? Then the next step is, okay, I have my sample, I have my population, I know who I'm testing. Now, how am I going to test this impact on job efficacy? It's probably a quantitative approach, definitely a quantitative approach. Maybe we can do with a questionnaire with different sections on the various aspects of job satisfaction. You have a few questions on a Likert scale of 0 to 5, with very much disagree to very much agree. So everything is kind of following, it's flowing, it's aligning. Then you have to think of, okay, how will I then analyze this? So you're probably not going to analyze it using discourse analysis, for example. You'll probably want to use some statistics there, but even so, still, you have to think about what is the most appropriate statistical method that will get to my research question. So everything, you have to be thinking one step ahead, almost thinking of, you have that we have this expression, a rolling stone gathers no moss. You need to build that momentum of always adding on and following that trajectory. So it takes a lot of thought and a lot of reflection.
I think that's a great point, and it's really something that's really important. But it's also not something to get too afraid of, because each methodology and each design choice sort of lends itself to certain related design choices. So you're not going from quantitative to all of the options. As soon as you make one choice, it sort of limits the options that you can use in the next step. And so really don't be afraid of that. But again, you can really take a look at any sort of design, research design textbooks, specifically if you find ones in your specific industry or field. That's great, because they've done a lot of the guesswork for you in terms of what's standard and acceptable in research. And back to what Alexandra said at the start, if you are using or basing your study on approaches used before, if you are making connections between two different approaches, you need to justify and make sure that alignment is super clear. So mistake number 5 is when there's not enough discussion regarding the limitations of your design. What can students do to really engage with the limitations of their design, Alexandra?
So the first thing I want to jump in and say is, as someone who was a graduate student, obviously, I get the fear of putting yourself out there and setting yourself up for critique by saying that there are any limitations at all. We're already terrified enough as graduate students that we're wrong all the time. And so why would we want to put ourselves up on a platter to our markers and say, here's what I'm limited by? But actually, this doesn't have to be a negative, and it shouldn't be a negative, because what the limitations really do is that they are showing that not only do you have a well thought out research design, but you're also aware of how it could be improved and how future researchers can add to it, or maybe address those limitations that you weren't able to get to. So in terms of not getting enough discussion on this, sometimes I'll see clients who will just say, this was my limitation, and then move on. But they don't actually explain that. It's like they're afraid, like I said. So what you need to do in that case, let's imagine the different kinds of limitations. So oftentimes they're methodological in nature, obviously in the methodology chapter. Sometimes it has to do with a smaller sample size than intended, especially in quantitative research. Let's say you had sought to get 150 participants, but you were only able to get 100. That is one of the limitations. And most of the time that's not your fault. So you can't really say that it's your limitation. It's a limitation of the methodology, and you have to explain why is that a limitation. So in that case, I wanted to get 150 participants. I got 100. This is a limitation because I wanted to run X statistical analysis. I wanted to be more generalizable in my results. But that's okay. You can still say that this is what I found, and future researchers, going back to my example of looking at the impact of Zoom breakout rooms on job satisfaction and SMEs, future researchers, maybe in other SMEs in different industries of SMEs, can take what you've done, seeing that you've pointed out this limitation, and add to it. So really, it's almost like you're leaving a breadcrumb trail for future researchers to pick up where you left off. So if you psychologically change your attitude of a limitation being a bad thing to a limitation being a starting point for future research, I think it's much less scary.
I think that's such a wonderful image. And it's really true. As we always keep saying, research, we're building on what's come before. And so it's super important to get that across. Mm-hmm. The other one that I think that's sort of counter to this that often comes up is sort of overcorrecting and tearing your study apart. It's important to just be clear that every study has limitations, but also there are certain limitations intrinsic to methods. So for instance, quantitative data is never going to give you the richness that you're going to get from qualitative data. And that's part of your design choices. So it's really not necessarily something you have to dig into. But things like sample size are important. Specific limitations of the methodology you implemented can be important. But really it's about thinking through your research at each point and going, what are the limitations, biases, or potential issues? How did I address them if they were addressable? How can I mitigate them or soften my findings? And what can I do about it going forward? Because some cases you can't fix it, but you can let someone else know it's going to be a problem, right?
And I will say, just to add to that, that's all excellent. What I think I'm seeing a lot of, and I can imagine you are too, is the current health situation in the world of COVID has limited a lot of our research landscape. And I think what I've found is that markers are very sympathetic, almost empathetic too. So I would say, like you're saying, David, don't fret too much about this.
Okay, so mistake number 6, and the final mistake that we're going to be covering today, is we often see poor structure or a lack of flow in the methodology chapter. So Alexandra, what should students look out for when they're building their structure of their methods chapter?
So the first piece of advice that I would give for this is oftentimes we have a tendency to get an idea in our brains and just want to write it down while it's still fresh in our minds. And while I appreciate that kind of idea and that tendency, it's actually better in the long run for you to approach a chapter, especially your methodology chapter, by first designing a logical structure for the chapter. So what I mean by that is when you are designing your methodology chapter, there are some sections that are expected in there. They're required, talking about the research design, the participants, the analysis methods, et cetera, et cetera. But there is also a structure that you need to present these in. So what I would suggest is start your chapter before you even dive in and say, okay, what are those elements that need to be guiding my chapter? You need to go step by step talking about, you need to think about first explaining again whether you're doing quantitative or qualitative, or what maybe depending on the program and what research paradigm are you using, positivist, interpretivist, pragmatist, laying those out first, and then moving in and lower and getting more specific, talking about the actual method type. Are you doing a case study? Are you doing giving a survey? Are you doing action research? Moving in even further, is it purely quantitative, purely qualitative, or are you taking a mixed approach? And if you go step by step like that, even putting your subsection headers in your chapter, you will know that the foundation of your chapter is clean, logical, and polished, and it will help you flesh it out in a way that you know that everything is grouped accordingly, everything is grouped logically, you have a nice structure. So that's what I would say for the structure aspect. Now, one of the pitfalls that we can fall into once we have that structure is getting into that mentality of everything is grouped and structured, and we think it's almost black and white. And so one of the other things that we see a lot is a lack of flow in the chapter. So you need to make sure that these different sections not only are logically sequenced, but also you are having them connect to each other in a fluid method. And so how do we do that? One of the biggest devices that we can use to increase flow are those transition devices. Those words like first, second, such as, that is, therefore. And those are, I would say those are difficult to get started using if you're not used to using them very much, especially if you are more of an analytical thinker. You want to say, here's what I did, here's the next thing I did, et cetera, et cetera. Try to add those transition devices, because if we zoom back on them, we can see in a better, clearer fashion how all of these things are actually connected. So not only do you need a strong structure that is almost like the bones of a house, but you also need to think about, okay, how do those flow together? So those are two big aspects that take some practice, but are well worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there, Alexandra. And all I can say is preach. Skeleton structure and transitions are the key to good structure and flow. Related to that as well is I like to even apply those transitionary words further and think about transitionary sentences to bridge between paragraphs, and even further transitionary paragraphs to switch between sections. And so once you start building those out, it moves from an outline into a really good flowing narrative. And to take it just one step further, even when you take that step back and look at your outline, make sure to keep an eye out for anything that's feeling misaligned or out of place and not related to that golden thread of your research. And so again, it's calling back to previous sections that we had, but really it's about taking a step back, but also taking a step in to see where things connect and how it fits together. All right, so that wraps up the 6 common mistakes for the methodology chapter. It's worth noting these are not all of the mistakes that come up, but these are ones that you can definitely keep an eye out for. Alexandra, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us, to share your insight and your knowledge. It's been really great having you here at the Coachcast.
Thanks for having me, David. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. I know that it's so fascinating to be so far apart from each other geographically, but to have so much in common in terms of, you know, our areas of expertise. And I know that you're super sympathetic to graduate students, just like I am. So it's always a pleasure to work with you and to help some of our students out.
All right, so that pretty much wraps up this episode of Grad Coach TV. If you're wanting to learn more about the methodology chapter, specifically how to write up the methodology chapter for your dissertation or thesis, be sure to check out the Grad Coach blog at gradcoach.com/blog. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your research project, be sure to check out our one-on-one private coaching service where you can work with a personal coach just like David or Alexandra, and they'll help you step by step through your research project. If you're interested in that and want to learn more, you can visit gradcoach.com, where you can find all the details and also book a free consultation with one of our friendly coaches. So that's all for today. Until next time, good luck.